And good evening, everyone. Greetings from snowy, sleety, rainy Gloucester, Massachusetts. And nice to be here. Tonight we're going to talk about this book I wrote, Technology, Fears and Scapegoats, which basically is asking the question, why have so many people turned against the tech industry in recent years, and what's that all about, and what's it actually mean to us? And you're all part of the tech industry, and the narratives get told about how people feel about what we all do, they matter. And they certainly matter in terms of the use of technology going forward. And so I'm going to talk about that and go through some of the misconceptions about our business. But I thought I'd introduce myself a little bit. I'm a New England person too, and grew up in this area, but I've always been in the tech research business and basically done three main things. For a long time, I was the head of research at a company called IDC, which is sort of the leading research company on the supplier side of the technology business. And one of the questions we always asked there was, why is every generation of technology, from mainframes to minis to PCs to smartphones, why are they always led by different companies, and what's going on with that disruptive competitive dynamic? So a lot of background in the supply side. But more recently, particularly when I was living in London for a long time, I was the head of research for a group that studied the IT departments, the corporate business IT, for a group called the Leading Edge Forum. And there, most of our work centered on, what is this whole shift of the center of gravity of technology to the internet and to the consumer market mean to the traditional corporate IT function? And certainly Agile and related topics came into that. But how does that change the world that used to be sort of a business IT centric thing to more of a consumer driven industry? And the last 5 years, I've worked for a group in Washington called the Information Technology Innovation Foundation, and they are the leading digital policy think tank in Washington. And there we try to develop policies that help the IT industry move forward. And it is there that I started doing a lot of this work of trying to really understand why so many people were down on tech, particularly in the media and in Washington and amongst policy circles. And I just started by saying, it wasn't always that way. That particularly for any of you who grew up in New England or Massachusetts, and if a certain age, you might remember that there was a time when the Massachusetts economy was terrible and was almost considered a dead space in the country. But then along came the mini computer industry and Digital Wang and Prime and all of those companies, and it became known as the Massachusetts Miracle. And it really became that thing that rejuvenated so much of the state here, enough to make old Mike Dukakis be a legitimate presidential contender. And similarly, when we had the challenge from Japan in the 80s and 90s, and people thought, well, they might take over the technology business. Well, this time it was Silicon Valley that soundly defeated them in a different wave of companies, Intel and Microsoft and Seagate and Novell and Compaq and all the rest of those. And so in those years, the tech business was very well thought of. It's like, wow, this, and the leaders of the tech firms, the Gateses and the Bezoses and Jobs, they were sort of the rock stars of the annual Davos meetings in Switzerland. And in fact, most of them were actually persons of the year. I think Andy Grove, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, they were all persons of the year for Time magazine at one point or the other. But in recent years, all of that is really sharply changed. And really the first question we always ask is, so when did that start? And I think it's pretty clear that it started around 2016, where two things happened. In America here, the election of Donald Trump, certainly, and in Europe, the UK's passing of the so-called Brexit referendum, where they withdrew from the European Union. And in both of those cases was sort of the same, that it was an unexpected, rebellious act of people being sort of fed up with the wars and inequalities or stupid wars of financial crises or what, a lot of things there, but in both cases, technology got an enormous amount of the blame. And if you remember those years, people look back and say, oh, it was all had to do with Russian bots and Facebook's use of Cambridge Analytica data. And they had all these things that, oh, in many ways it was tech's fault. And tech was used as essentially a scapegoat. And that'll be a recurring theme that one of the things, and of course that was, any sort of closer look at how much influence those things have show that they were very, very, very minor, and that the other issues were much more important. And more recently, that was mostly the left who objected at that time, but more recently, the right has certainly objected during COVID with some of the censorship and pressures on tech firms and all the things that went there, and that had it. And now today, of course, with all Mr. Musk stuff and Doge that's part of the backlash as well. So there's all of these things, and there have always been tech critics, but they're louder now, and it's not just basically what's happened is all these negative things I just mentioned have breathed life into a whole series of tech criticisms that have always been there, but were usually sort of seen as sort of second tier things to worry about. But now we hear that technology is destroying privacy, that it's polarizing the country, that it's undermining trust, that it's going to put us all out of work, that it's ripping off consumers, that it's dangerously addictive, that it's wiping out other languages around the world, that it's destroying journalism, that it's making deepening societal biases, and even most recently, it's an actual threat to democracy. And in the book, we take on 40 of those charges, and our effort is to show that not that there's no truth in any of them, but that the basic argument in all of those cases is that the fears are either exaggerated fears or scapegoating or just misconceptions about things. And our goal has been to try to restore the sort of balance in how people think about our business. And what I thought I would do today is give you 3 sample myths that we try to debunk, and then take your questions of those and see how the time goes. And if there's more time, we'll take more questions or move on to other topics. But I'll start off with one of the myths that, and it's a great myth, and we hear it all the time. And in fact, I heard today someone said it, and it's that people say that, well, technology is changing the world as never before. And, that sounds good. You might think it makes sense in a way, but it's fundamentally, it really couldn't be much more wrong. That, the tech business is roughly 60 years old or so from the original IBM mainframes in the 60s and all the things that have gone, the spectacular progress of our industry. There are computers and software and emails and GPS and mapping and smartphones and all streaming media, all these things that we've done, they're great. But if you say, all right, the impact of those technologies over the last 60 years, and let's just compare them to the technologies that came out in the preceding 60 years and see how they stack up. Well, if you look at that sort of first half of the 20th century technologies, what did we have that came out there? Well, we had electricity, we had lighting, we had cars and trains and planes and rockets and hot and clean running water and heat and refrigeration and air conditioning and washers and dryers and all kinds of appliances. We had telephones and radio and film and TV. We had nuclear power and nuclear weapons, and then we had the birth control pill, and these were huge changes in the way that people lived. And if you compare those and say, well, which stack of technologies changed the world more, I find it hard for anyone to make the case that it has been our business. And that's no knock on our industry and all the great things it's done, but I think it is sort of a statement that the actual needs of the physical world tend to be much greater than the impact of the information world. And most of that first half of the 20th century innovations came from the physical world and not the information one. So, why does this matter? Well, it matters in a way that, I see some ratings going on, which is interesting on the screen. But anyways, why does it matter? Well, it matters because, if you believe that today's challenges and pace of change are actually faster than those of the past, then the fact that the previous innovations were by and large very beneficial is less reassuring. And if you believe that the stakes are higher because of today's technologies being so decisive, then it might make you less tolerant of those with other views. So we think that myth is a really important one. And there's another sort of corollary to that myth, and that is that the speed of change is actually greater than in the past. And that's not really true either. People talk a lot about the speed of AI today, but if you really look at that, the concepts of neural networks go back to the 1950s with Marvin Minsky. And, we had expert systems in the 70s and 80s. And the original DeepMind innovations at Google go back to around 2015 and 16. And so now we have, ChatGPT and all the stuff coming out today. But it really took us 60 to 70 years to get to the point where the AI is actually useful and good, and it's spectacularly good now. And so that speed of change doesn't even come close to things like television and radio that went from being in nobody's house in the 20s to being in everybody's house in the 30s and 40s and changing and so many things. So we tend to overestimate the speed, and again, that can be a source of anxiety. So that first point about just trying to keep the impact and speed of our industry in a broader perspective, I think is a good starting point for trying to get a more balanced view. And I'll just sort of pause and see if there are any questions about that. No, anything? I see some stuff in the chat, but I don't know. Is it Maggie? Do you see any questions coming in anywhere?
No, just some just capturing some ideas in there. I was just looking back too, like Marvin Minsky, like he was born in the 20s, a MIT
Indeed.
guy, right? Like these are
And
not, yeah, some of the ideas that, like you were saying, I think are like been brewing for a long time. A lot of these
his
things,
work in neural networks
right?
is relevant today. Yeah, it's quite remarkable.
There is one in the chat that says that 2016 was a turning point. Brexit and unconventional rebellious sentiment in the US and EU. So that was one of the comments that was made.
I'm sorry, was there a question in there?
Basically, there was a comment about the topic that says in the chat, it says 2016 was a turning point.
Yeah, it was,
Brexit
yeah.
and unconventional / rebellious sentiment in the US and EU.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the word really scapegoat came, that the tech industry got way too much of the blame for those developments, whether of the people who disagree with those developments. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, maybe a question.
Yep.
Is there a reason maybe why we're not looking at addressing people's concerns with the technology more, coming up with maybe some kind of standards or regulations? We have AI, even back originally with Isaac Asimov had his law of robotics and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and as I said earlier, that all of the issues that I'm going to talk about raise real challenges and real concerns that it makes perfect sense for the public sector and the industry itself to address and take care of. My concern is that those issues are getting really 90% of the attention and not the benefits. And the analogy I'd use, if it'd be like during when the rise of the auto industry, if all the conversations were about the safety of cars rather than what people did with them and the value and the freedoms and all the things that went with it, that if you spend all of your time just looking at the risks and the cautions and the safeties, that you create, well, in many ways, you create a framework a lot like what we see in many parts of Europe today, where you have this incredible precautionary approach that really slows innovation, and in that case is left them behind, because whatever we do as a country, China and others are going to be full speed ahead, and therefore keeping that high rate of innovation is essential, and you need to take into account the risks and the downsides, but they can't be used to really slow things down. And that contrast between sort of a rapidly technically evolving Asia and a Europe that in many cases is trying to put the brakes on sort of gives you the difference there. And America right now is somewhere in the middle there.
There is one more question in the chat from Jill. Even if the pace of change is not faster, the risk of global damage from these changes is much higher, isn't it?
I don't know how you could make that case. I mean, you'd have to really, and we'll get into, you'd really have to ask what global damages someone is referring to. And I'll talk about the next two slides. I'll talk about privacy and misinformation as two often cited damages, but I'll try to put those in perspective as well. But what are these great damages would be first question I would ask back.
Well, it depends on who's asking the question. I mean, there is no doubt that particular social media, which is an offshoot of technology, has made massive changes in how protests get done. And if you're the government in power, that's a negative. If you are one of the young revolutionaries out there running the Velvet Revolution, Arab Spring, a disinfo campaign from whatever state, it's a net positive. So it's going to depend on which side of the coin you're on, whether it's positive or negative. But I think the recent kerfuffle with TikTok is very, very indicative.
Yeah, you mentioned the protest, which is a good one, but a lot of people, myself included, make a lot of parallels between our times today with the 60s, where you had lots of discontent and riots and violence and protests and all that. And all that happened without social media. It happened through other ways. So protests have been a part of America for its whole history. I don't know if there's any more protests. I mean, the biggest marches in Washington would have come in the civil rights movement in those times. So I think social media is the way it is done today, but I don't think you can make a case that it's fundamentally changed protests, whether you support those protests or whether you're not. It's just the way it's done today. It's just the way in the past it would have done using radio and phones and mail and all the things that people use to get people to organize in the past. So I'm not sure, you start out with all the damage. If it's organizing people to protest, I would say that's sort of a wash.
It facilitates it, particularly in totalitarian regimes. Arguably, the Arab Spring, since a lot of those regimes in the Middle East are totalitarian or fairly repressive. The fact that Twitter was based outside of those regimes made it more difficult for the regimes to crack down.
Yeah, I guess, but you know, repressive regimes have been there through certainly my whole life, and they weren't any better before, before the internet. The Russians or Chinese or whomever was pretty brutal, and there was basically no way of checking or getting information about them. So, again, I think in that particular case, I would say that technology has led to less repression. It gives new tools for oppressors, and we'll talk a bit about that with the privacy bit. But
it's a two-sided coin, absolutely.
yeah, it's always a two-sided coin. But the question is whether things are getting better or worse, or what is the narrative? The narrative is a lot like you say, that it's a tool of oppression, but I think a more objective view shows that it's makes it harder for the oppressors because the information gets out.
They lose control of the narrative.
Who does? Oh, the oppressors, yes. But certainly compared to the past.
Right, and that's a good thing. That's why they want to get rid of TikTok, because they want to be able to control the narrative. A lot of people get their information from TikTok.
Well, we can certainly talk about TikTok, and to me, TikTok should probably be dealt with for a reason that you don't often hear, but it's a simple matter of reciprocity. That in China, Twitter, X, Google, Facebook, they can't operate at all in any serious way. And so why do we let a Chinese company do that here when they don't let our firms do that there? And so taking away that ownership aspect just on reciprocity grounds seems reasonably sensible to me. And then the security grounds are there that, all those kids on TikTok today saying things, doing things, that information is going to be potentially in a Chinese server for the rest of those people's lives. And when they get into politics or business or whatever, that information might come back. It's just not something we need to do. So I'm okay with the security argument, but I'm even more supportive of the reciprocity argument, because why, I don't understand why we let people do things here that they won't let us do there. It just doesn't seem right.
And also capturing all the metadata of
Yeah, totally.
everyone's location all the time. People just conveniently, I know kids can be given a pass, but adults just conveniently pass that along, like because we're used to American companies like Meta selling our metadata of
Yeah.
everything that we do and every keystroke we make now. So but when you're talking about a foreign, when you're talking about another superpower having all the metadata on all Americans, it really begs
Yeah,
to be
to me,
addressed.
they should be forced to sell it to an American or European or some other. I mean, what's the problem for them? They'll make a ton of money, and all the anxieties will go away, and TikTok will continue. It doesn't seem like that big a problem to me, but we sure turned it into one.
Yeah. Anyway, Meta will sell them our data anyway, China, if they want, if they're the highest bidder anyway.
Yeah,
Anyway.
but kids these days aren't on Meta a whole lot.
Well, Meta, don't forget, has Threads and Instagram.
And yeah,
Yeah, for
Meta owns
sure.
Instagram.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Teenager, they're all over Insta.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Not
there's
on
no doubt there.
Snapchat, they're on Insta.
Yeah. So, I don't know, should we crack on to the next topic? We'll do that? Yeah. The next one, and this really hits a lot of things you're just asking about, but we hear all the time that technology is destroying individual privacy. And of course, you can make a case of why that is true, that, the cameras, the profiling, the targeting, the location, the usage, the identities, and all the records and all the things that are kept track of. It's clearly incredible amount of data about all of us that is out there. And so that gets an enormous amount of attention, and rightly so, and is totally understandable. But the one thing you never hear about, and then literally almost never, is all the ways that the internet and technology in general has increased privacy for just about all of us. And that's so easy to see. It's so obvious that it doesn't get mentioned. But if people want to know about an issue of health or gender or sexuality that they don't want to talk to someone about, they can search on that. You think back to small town America before the internet, people had no privacy whatsoever. That the local store knew what you bought, the drugstore knew what you bought, the bookstore knew what you bought, your neighbors saw who was coming and going, who you were talking to, the postman knew what was being delivered. There was no privacy whatsoever. Even in your own house, there was no privacy because you didn't have headphones, you didn't have your own screens, you couldn't read what you wanted to do. Everybody was in the same rooms and experience all that stuff. And you think back to even the work life, depending on people's ages, before the internet and before text and phones, it was extremely difficult often to sort of manage your family or personal life while you were in the office. You couldn't, a lot of things you weren't going to just talk about sitting there in your office cube. So people went to great lengths to go out into the parking lot and or sit in their car or try to find somewhere where they could do that. And technology is basically solved that for everybody. And there's so many things that people want to buy and use and get delivered that they don't want to go do themselves. And so, or even just what you want to read or listen to. Do you really want everybody to always know that? And technology solves all of these problems. So when you look at it from a consumer's point of view, they're essentially making a bet. And they're saying, yeah, I know if I search on this stuff on Google, that data is going to be in there for a long time. And it may well shape some ads that are sent that way. And there's a long shot that maybe somehow it gets leaked and causes me embarrassment or or some problem, whatever it does. But the odds of that happening are very, very low. And in fact, it's a much safer bet to do that than to go to ask a friend or family or a colleague things that they might share with others or might get out and might also. So people make that bet by the billions every day. People say, all right, that is the way to access confidential information that didn't exist before. And yeah, there are risks, but people are making that bet because it's a winning bet. Billions of people do it that way, and how many have been seriously harmed by that information getting out? It's orders of magnitude less. And so why does that matter? Well, if you ever watch when, say, the CEOs of big tech go into DC to talk about privacy, and they have those hearings all the time, they go and they get beat up on all the downsides that we know about. They're called surveillance capitalists and all these things with the data, but no one ever recognizes the real contributions that they make. And it tends to turn those hearings into sort of gotchas and antagonistic, and all the big tech CEOs want to do is say, yeah, well, we'll try to do better, and they want to just get out of there and go away. And the narrative gets entrenched that this is some horrible, horrible problem, when in fact, people today have more privacy than they've ever had in human history. And that is, something that you really can't say often enough. And so I'll throw that one out and ask you what y'all think.
Well, I think it's changed, right? The nature of what privacies we have. Like, just to your point, like, yeah, if you wanted to get information about sensitive topics in the past, it's like, where did you turn? Like, right?
Mhm.
If you were lucky enough to have like a great library and
Yeah,
but yeah, so now and I think, I mean, it's really, it's so taken for granted now, right? We have the world at our fingertips. We have every bit of like information and knowledge and learning, and then we can, speak with people all around the world, some bots in there, of course, but yeah, but then yeah, on the flip side, with the digital nature, is the ability to track things in a different way. So there's a different, so it's a sort of a different privacy challenge, but yeah, there is like the two. There is that huge benefit that is just we've just taken that for granted. I see what
Yeah,
you're saying.
but
Yeah.
yeah, because the narrative is, in the media, in Congress, in just amongst people, is overwhelmingly negative. And it's you know, it it doesn't have to be that way. It could be much more balanced.
One of the things I notice about this data privacy, it feels like my intuition is taken over by all these trackers. So I'm a mindful person into yoga and meditation. So what I would do is I look for something from the universe when I'm making a decision. Am I seeing a red sunrise today or a yellow sunrise? Some kind of a things that works with my intuition. That's how I operate. And suddenly, because I'm hearing some music related to sunrise in the night, morning, you will get all these signals to you from the tracker because I said something about sun to my mom on the phone, or I searched something in the YouTube
Yeah,
for listening to your music. Suddenly, what happens? You are bombarded with whatever your thought was previously, so it's killing my intuition because it's very impossible to think because the technology is overpowering the anything else literally because the tracking and moving you into buying things. I might have searched something like a red color dress, and then every day until you buy the dress you'll be bombarded with red color dresses. So it's pushing your limits to do something that you wouldn't normally do, right? I work in the retail. I'm a product manager in the retail, and I do these softwares
yeah,
myself, but still it's like an invasion of my own personality. It's pushing me to what I am not and taking away what I am. So I don't know how do you address that. That's kind of privacy of invasion,
yeah,
not
yeah.
only about physically but my mind and my soul.
Yeah, it's the advertising business, uh, and it's advertising that has funded the vast majority of the tech world. And a lot of you are in sort of the corporate IT and large organization IT, and the center of gravity of our world has shifted to the consumer market, and the consumer markets are driven by ads. And the interesting about that is people have tried to develop services that are not ad supported that they have to charge for, but they lose because people take free over pay and consistently. So, and yeah, as you say, sometimes it's creepy that
I think you
yeah,
got frozen, David, for a second.
along the margins you can sort of maybe police that a little bit. But again, is the harm compared to the benefits? It seems like it's a that I mean, the thing I always use as an example is of free is you look at a product like Google Maps and just how extraordinary it is, and all the way it helps you navigate anywhere completely for free. And compared to what was there before of people trying to make sense of a paper map or pulling over places to ask directions and getting stressed out in traffics, and it's just solved all of those what were once really pretty aggravating and stressful problems and turned it into something very low stress. So, tech can take a lot of stress out of your life too. It can take the stress of work, balancing work and family life. It can add stress sometimes, but it can definitely help there. So, on the stress factor, again, you're going to get a balance, but I think it does pretty well there. Any other questions about the privacy discussion? No?
I was just going to ask, how do we minimize the risk of exposing you know, people's personal identifiable information and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, people clearly have to take steps to minimize the risk and do so. I mean, the companies have a strong interest in financial interest in not harming their customers. So they are over time going to work pretty hard on this issue. But there are cybercrime is a real thing, identity theft, malware, particularly ransomware, and those things all came largely not because of technology per se, but because the internet grew up in a sort of informal, unstructured, fundamentally insecure way. And it came with those problems. And now people are trying to basically whack-a-mole to deal with them. And they're struggling, particularly the ransomware is an enormous problem. And, to me, when they say, what should the tech industry do? One of the things that the book is really there is like, oh, what are the real problems here? And to me, the big problems are security, malware, ransomware, fraud, identity theft, protecting children, which is a huge issue all around the world, and trying to maintain competitiveness with China. That to me, those are sort of the three main things that we stress of what the American policy agenda should be all about: safer and more competitive. And if you sort of stick to those guidelines, you can you can worry about a lot fewer things and focus on things that to me really seem to matter. Yeah, something to chat about a credit
That was a
freeze.
good, that was it's a little tangential, but yeah,
Oh,
that is a good point about the credit freeze of the credit agencies. Yeah, like you can there along with the greater risks we have automatic things like that, like the credit bureaus have to offer credit freezes, right? So that people can't steal your identity to open new lines of credit and stuff like that. It's a good
yeah.
offshoot.
I mean, is there really, people do some pretty interesting analysis of whether digital crime and digital technologies I mean, they've obviously created some new crimes, but they've also eliminated a lot of old crimes that if people aren't walking around in cash, that with a lot of cash, that changes a lot of things. If stores aren't necessarily holding a lot of cash, that can change a lot of things. If you're not having to ship cash around to banks all the time, that reduces. So there's downsides to digital commerce and digital technologies in security, but there are also a lot of upsides. And a lot of people think there'd be far less crime if we did it entirely digital, because cash is still huge in the drug business and in other areas. And then of course, Bitcoin comes in to fill that need to some extent too. So there's always been criminals, and crime these days is arguably not that different in the past, but takes new digital forms for sure. Okay, the third one I wanted to cover is probably the one you hear most today. And that is, and we've heard a little bit on the call, that social media is the main driver of misinformation. And I don't believe that is true. Social media has certainly amplified information, but it hasn't been the main driver. And I'll explain why I say that. One of the things I did as part of the analysis, I asked a lot of people, myself included, well, what is all this internet misinformation that is supposedly so dangerous? And we tried to come up with a sort of top 10 things. And it goes back to people saying things like, well, maybe 9/11 was an inside job, or maybe Barack Obama wasn't born in the US, or for those of you who know the QAnon Pizzagate theory, or that Bill Gates was secretly injecting chips into our arms with the COVID vaccines, and the Sandy Hook child killings were somehow faked by somebody, and those are sort of the big ones that people cite. But then you say, well, how many people actually believe those? And it's like, all right, some, but you make a very good case it's well under 10%. So, all right, there's a problem there. So 9, 7, 8, 5, 3% of the people believing, oh, some crazy theories and all. And it's like, all right, well, that's some misinformation, but what other sort of misinformation has been out there in recent years? Well, we were told that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and well, everybody sort of was told to believe that. We were told that the Steele dossier came from highly credible British intelligence sources, and it turned out to be campaign opposition research. We were told that the idea that COVID came from the Wuhan lab was some sort of crazy racist conspiracy theory. And now, of course, it's the dominant theory and almost certainly the case. We were told that Hunter Biden's laptop was clearly Russian disinformation, even though the people telling you that knew that it was actually real. And you can go on and on of things that, I don't know if you remember, there was a time when people crossing the border, there were some patrol people, and they were on horses, and they were actually whipping their horses to control them. But for months, we were hearing about how the border agents were whipping the people crossing the river, and it was completely untrue. And these stories, and there's at least 10 or 20 of these that one could go through, they weren't believed by 3 or 5% of the people. They were believed by 70 and 80% of the people. And in fact, if you didn't believe them, you were considered some sort of fringe conspiracy, person who didn't believe what the truth as it was being told to you. And these were the dominant stories of our time. Not and many people still believe the things I just said to this date. And so, the and this is what I talk about scapegoating. All right, there's a lot of misinformation out there, but by far the biggest misinformation has come from either the media printing those stories or the government, or you look at the other big one, of course, the 2020 election. Well, it wasn't the internet spreading that; it was Trump spreading that, and the internet may have amplified it. But all of these major things that were wrong were not created and driven by the internet. They were driven by governments, politicians, or so-called trusted media. And so when we look at why does nobody believe the media, well, they don't believe it because they have a good reason not to believe it, because we keep being told all kinds of things that are nonsense. We were told that Joe Biden was fit as a fiddle until we saw with our own eyes that he wasn't. We were you go on forever about these things. So, the media loves to blame, and because the lack of societal trust is a huge problem today. And it's just so convenient to say, oh yeah, that's because of the internet, that's because of social media, but it isn't. And that is just a huge misconception that is out there. And I'd go as far as to say that in correcting virtually all of the misinformation I mentioned and others, the internet was part of the correction. The fact checkers, the individuals out there, the bloggers, the Snopes of the world, the people actually using the internet to debunk some things they're told, have done much more to get rid of misinformation. And you're never going to get rid of all misinformation on the internet. You've got billion people saying things out there. But if you look at things that drive the narrative, very few of them come from that world. They come from the traditional media and our traditional institutions. And the distrust that we have has mostly come from them. And that's actually even worse than having it come from the internet. Comments, suggestions?
No, I
Lee,
agree with you. I agree. It's, obviously most of us refer to it as the fake media, right? We're finding
Yeah,
out through Dodge that they were funneled money to, run these stories. So I think more to come. But what I want to focus on is just because what's happening now is if you have a different opinion of something that you really can't prove, that's now referred to as misinformation.
by both sides.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not, yeah, I don't necessarily agree that that's misinformation. That's a
No, it
difference
isn't.
of
Yeah,
opinion. When you
yeah,
pay a media outlet to run some story, right? That is misinformation when you know it's fake.
yeah.
Us
And
having agreement whether or not I don't know, global warming is real, right? That's our opinions, right? It's an invisible claim.
Yeah, I mean, some claims are more legit than others, but I think the larger point you're making is, people have had this idea that we should have this official truth, and there should be organizations that basically I say what the official truth is. And we went all through that with COVID. Anyone who had a different opinion was basically accused of being some nut, even though many of them were doctors and scientists, and many of the things they said about side effects and that it didn't stop you from getting sick and it didn't stop you from spreading it, that it mostly stopped you from dying, which is obviously a good thing. But many scientists had it more right than the official views, but they were censored. And so, this and all those groups that were set up and the efforts to get Facebook and others and the old Twitter to just say what the so-called truth is not it just doesn't work, because there's nobody who consistently has the truth all the time. I mean, you sort of have to fight out each one in the marketplace.
Yeah, and COVID was a good example for me as an eye opener for how um that convenient truth was what was pushed. It was like the dumbed down version that
Oh, totally.
was sold, and it really, I mean, besides doing us a disservice by not giving, I mean, I searched for the real information myself, but not everyone can has the wherewithal to do that, right? So they're just, and so you're listening to the sound bites and you want to trust your government, who supposedly has the best information, but they would pretty much admit to the fact that they were just dumbing things, making things simple so that the common man, right, could understand things. And
The
it was
6 foot
such a
rule.
disservice. It was such a disservice. It was like
Yeah, totally.
really, yeah.
And they knew for a long time that kids were not at great risk from COVID. And they just couldn't admit that they got it wrong when they originally just let that go. And the damage of that is going to be with us for a long time. And so a lot of trust gets lost, and rebuilding that trust is hard. And it's not going well so far in the current environment.
But then that sort of opened us up to this sort of wild west of, oh well, we can't trust anything they say, which isn't that.
Well,
There's
that's it.
truth in everything that was said to us too. It just wasn't the full truth, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And just people do surveys on high trust versus low trust societies. And America used to be a very high trust society in the 50s and 60s. It was right at the top of the list. It's now the bottom of the list amongst developed. I'd say only like 25% of the populace thinks that you can believe that what the government and media says most of the time. I mean, they don't even agree with that. And so we've done a terrible job of destroying trust of both parties, both medias, left, right, whatever. It's a mess. But we have been here before. I use the 60s again. The 60s, we had these so-called generation gap where kids didn't trust anything. That they didn't trust Vietnam, they didn't trust Nixon, they didn't trust a lot of things, and so it's been that way before, and we got through it. So there's hope. So we got about 10 minutes left. I could take more questions. I could talk a little bit about
So there's
AI.
AI, yeah. So the AI, I think AI is a
Yeah.
popular one. There is a question
Yeah.
about the prospect of AI to achieve human capabilities by the end of the decade and making us redundant with no chance for catching up or reskilling,
Yeah.
and how that affects on the economy and society. And it's
Yeah.
just a small one for you. Like we want that.
And yeah, that's
vibrant
it's a big part of the book is I think we have 3 or 4 chapters about the various critiques of AI, because most of them take that view of all the potential downsides that are all there, job losses and inequalities and deep fakes and going rogue and 2001 and all these things. But I would say this, that America and Western societies in particular, and some of the Asian ones as well, they're going to need all the sort of automation we can get. That, a country like Japan is aging so rapidly, it has so few children that their population is going to go from 120 million to 70 million over like 40 years. And those 70 million are going to be really, a lot of them are going to be really old. And there's just no way that they can take care of that group of people and have a vibrant economy without incredible amounts of automation, and in this case, robots. And so I actually think we're going to need all the robots we can get for at least the next bunch of years. And these patterns are also true in America. We have worker shortages. We have all kinds of jobs that people don't want to do. If we weren't bringing in so many immigrants, who knows how a lot of these jobs would get done. And so there's at least a short-term period where having automation, having robots is terrific. And then just on the AI thing, I don't know. I mean, maybe I just think ChatGPT and some of the products are just the most terrific things. You can just spend so much time learning from them. They're just remarkable. But yeah, I haven't seen them take that many people's jobs away. And so you have these sort of speculative fears, and I would say, to go back to just when Google came out, which was the early 2000s, Google in some ways did some of the same thing. It gave you information instantly at your fingertips. It didn't package it as nicely as chat does and turn it into a nice essay. But if you were willing to wade through a few links, you get basically the same information. And what impact did Google have on the job market? Say hardly any at all. And literally, it became this great tool that everybody uses. But other than the advertising industry, it didn't really change the economy very much. And so, before I worry about we're not going to need doctors and we're not going to need, bankers, we'll see. But it hasn't happened yet. And I also said the whole thing about the importance of the physical world. Is AI going to rebuild Gaza or Syria? Is it going to get us clean energy that it really efficiently? No, these are going to grow smart food where you don't need pesticides and all these things. It's not going to do all those things, at least not in any time frame people can see. So, I think it's AI it's probably the best example, current one, of just people seeing the fears that haven't happened yet, and then sort of ignoring the short-term gains that are basically right in front of our face that you can see. And so we're pretty bullish on that. And again, you go back to the competitive thing. Well, if we want to slow down AI, you can bet your last dollar that China, India, and others are not. They're going to be full speed ahead. And if anything, the whole DeepSeek thing was a terrific wake-up call for our AI industry. It was also, from an AI industry point of view, a fantastic thing because it basically lowered the cost of AI by 90% or whatever number you want to use. But we were heading down a path of really expensive, really top-heavy, really giant, super big tech AI. And maybe that's not the path. Maybe it's going to be more like an open source and more fragmented world because the costs aren't, we'll see how all this plays out. There's always room for big company leaders, but, China, forget about what the fact it was Chinese. The fact that they proved they could do it so cheaply, it's not like people here are stupid. They're going to figure out the same thing.
Right.
You can't hide the computer science and the thinking that goes into it. And so, if you're OpenAI or you're Google or whatever you are, you're looking and saying, all right, we got to do what they're doing. Or if you're a startup, you say, how'd they do that? We can do it. So, that's sort of, and in fact, maybe that's a good way of sort of, from the book, of so much of these fears have to do with big tech, basically Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Netflix, the giants. And you say, oh, people, they're going to run everything. But the whole history of our industry says that no, they won't. That, look at TikTok that rose right up against Facebook, and if it could, who knows where that will go. Look at Look at DeepSeek. Look at all the Chinese taking over the electronic vehicle market and probably the self-driving market. That look at Bitcoin. Oh, look at all these things that have just come out. Look at Nvidia. Just crushing Intel and all these so-called giants. And so it's happening right before our eyes that a new set of companies is coming into the space. And the big tech companies, they make incredible amounts of money. They've produced all these super rich people. Of course, people have some envy there, but they know as well as anyone that the whole history of our business is some new players coming along, figuring out a better way, and this
It's
too
so,
can pass. And
it's so funny. There's a great example of like some of the AI early adopters, the customer service bots, right? The text bots
yeah,
and stuff like that
yeah,
everyone loves to hate, right? But it's
they're
funny
horrible.
because even though it's no one ever loved being on hold waiting for a person for customer service.
Yeah,
Anyway, it's always been one of those love to hate
yeah, sure.
services. But when you really drill down into it, um, that usage of AI instead of people is really not just a reflection of that we have the technology, right? Because the technology that could do those simple bots has been around for a while, but to me, it's more a reflection of that companies where they value um, that part of their service. They're not making money off of that part. Like customer service and tech
Yeah,
support has always been considered a cost center, right? So like they're cutting costs. That's why the quality has gone down. There's fewer people there because they've always wanted to drive the cost down. And they're going to use whatever tools. It's not that AI has, taken these people's jobs. These weren't
yeah,
like high
absolutely.
paying
Yeah,
jobs. These were like, yeah.
yeah. The classic example, remember when automatic teller machines, ATMs came out and people said, oh, that's going to destroy all these jobs in banking. Well, in fact, what's happened is the ATMs have become useless, that people use them less and less and less because they're using digital cash and other payment systems and all. And the number of people in the banks has actually gone up because they're doing other things. And so things that we think are going to take over the world, you believe it when you see it, because things don't always play out the way we're told they're going to play out. And by and large, humans are pretty good at a lot of things, and still are essential to. Look at our healthcare system. You make a claim, you still have to get a human involved to sort it out, and that's actually really sad that we can't be more automated and all that goes there. But as you say, AI in customer service, it's people are making those claims for a long time and still aren't there.
Yep.
So we're pretty much the end of our time. Anything else you want to discuss, or?
Yeah, this is great. So where's the best place for if people want to get your book
You can get it
besides
on, certainly on
Backpedal?
Amazon. Well, you can get it on
Get
Amazon
on
for
Amazon.
in
I
general,
put
but
a link in up higher to the book, Technology, Fears, and Scapegoats. Let me put that. And can we share your LinkedIn as well, David?
absolutely.
You
Yeah,
want to
sure.
put it? I can grab it. Well, and folks, feel free to come off your mic and ask some questions while we have David here. If there's points that you wanted to follow up on, or other points we didn't touch on your technology, fears, and scapegoats. And Pepe, we see your desk, I think,
You know what?
or your window.
I'm not sure what's happening.
Technology
It's
is taking over
Of
Pepe's
course, of course.
camera.
a nice
Uh,
floor, though, whatever it is.
yeah, no, it's a ceiling, I think.
The ceiling. Okay. Just so you know. There it is. We got, okay.
You see me?
There you
Okay,
are.
yeah,
There you are. Hey.
yeah. Yeah, so sometimes the phone uh, thinks that, he's a boss and wants to take over. But in either case, my closing remarks will be just to say, David, thank you so much for such an engaging talk and for joining Agile New England. I thought it was adequate, more than adequate, that you live in New England and that given the start of the year, I thought it was great that you graciously accepted to kick off the monthly meeting today. And again, just want to keep it simple. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for everybody for joining.
Yeah. So that's it. Maggie, back to you. I just wanted to, because I had reached out to David and we've been talking for a few months from now, and finally, tonight finally happened.
Yeah.
We got a nice package of your books that we're ready to distribute among our audience. And again, just ecstatic that you join us tonight. And thank you everybody for joining tonight.
Yeah, the
Back to you.
secret's
Back to
out.
you.
So I'm actually planning a in-person event for next month. Keep an eye out for your email, or if you haven't, you all have registered, so we have your information. And we have a bunch of David's books, so we're going to make those available to people. So that's great, and it just come out just last year, right? So just months ago. So looking forward to distributing those and having more discussions around those. So look for that invite to come very soon. Just ironing out the logistics before I send that out. But feel free, folks, come off your mic, come on your camera if you want. To ask David some more questions. I will shut off the recording soon if we want to talk more candidly. You can ping me. You can ping me privately in the chat if you want as well. In the meantime, I got the couple little slides I can dispense of while people come off their put together some questions or come off their mics. I shut down my sharing, so. But yeah, feel free while we got David here, ask him about his book, ask him about his background, all that good stuff. Share some of your technology fears and scapegoats. I lost my slides here. It's all right. You guys know you guys have seen the slides before.
David, I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
What motivated you to pick this particular topic for a book? It's kind of like so different from other books. So what led you to specifically pick this topic for a book?
Yeah, it's a good question, and thanks for asking. I mean, the group I'm working with these days is there to promote innovation and to try to promote American competitiveness. And whenever you talked about issues, technology, AI, automation, robots, you had like these incredible headwinds of people just saying, "Oh, it's terrible. It's going to destroy all the jobs and it's bad." It was just annoying, and it's like, wow, you got to push back against this stuff because it's important for the work that our organization is doing. And just more personally, it's like, hey, I've been in this tech business for my whole sort of career, and I don't get this whole thing about being so negative about it. I think it's done some great stuff, and sort of like my opening remark that we're all part of this community, and it's as one of my colleagues said, if you're in work for tech today, people, it's almost like you're working for the oil industry. You're just some sort of polluter and doing bad things, and it's just something that you want to push back against and then get people to see in a better way. It just seemed like a good thing to do.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
really good, actually. I get asked the same questions not only from outsiders, people from different parts of the world, from family, as well as my teenage children, because I'm in the software. These are like so many questions I always get bombarded with. I look
Well,
forward
that's
to
the other,
reading your book.
yeah, that's the other thing, you know, do kids want to go into a field that people are saying is the source of all of our problems? And so it's a deep issue. And Meg, I can maybe take one more and then I got to scoot, but we got one more, that's cool.
I put in the chat. Someone asked if there was a privacy concern with OpenAI or DeepSeek specifically, like privacy.
Is there a what with them? A privacy? Oh,
concerns. Yeah.
no, I mean, the same, really. I mean, you know, that open data, the stuff they use, I would say the biggest privacy risk that I've actually experienced is when it gets things wrong, the so-called hallucinated. In its early days, there was some terrible ones where they were describing people and just saying really stupid things about them. But they're getting way better at that. I routinely sort of check my own or other people I know, and they just get more and more accurate. And so I feel like, you know, you go back to the original embarrassments that Microsoft had and that Google had with Tay and Gemini and these things, and you don't hear so many of those anymore. They are.
And isn't it true, like if we can get down to if you know, well, I read recently that like DeepSeek and that you can run things more natively. So if you don't have to be connected to the internet, right, to do like if you can train your own models, then that greatly enhances your privacy, right?
Yeah, and then NVIDIA's got that new sort of standalone super desktop that can run a lot of these things just detached from anything, which is pretty amazing.
Right. Wow, it's fascinating. Looking forward to finishing your book.
Oh, please do. Well, thank you.
Thank